joining us midday. Okay. Hello, welcome to the second webinar. We're waiting for more to join.
I am watching you from the airport, so just mute the sound right now to avoid disturbing me. Okay, bye. A nice webinar. Bye-bye.
Thank you, Miltiadis. Have a nice flight soon.
Thank you very much.
Welcome to everybody joining. Let's wait just 3 minutes, 4 minutes for as many people as possible to join in from the beginning, and we are gonna start with the webinar. Okay, I think we can begin. Once more, welcome everybody. Thank you for being here on a Friday afternoon for somebody, morning for others, depending where are you located in Europe or in the world. I am Clelia Petru. I'm working with European Universities Cyprus in the research group Serides, and we are one of the partners of Fire Risk. Along with Silvanus and Firelaw, we have organized, this is the second out of 2 webinars on managing and living wildfires in Europe. Today, actually, we are going to talk about fuel land management strategies as part of the integrated fire management approach. Here you have the agenda. You can see that it's a busy agenda. We have a lot of discussions coming up, short discussions, so we can fuel up the thoughts, the conversation, and we would like your input and your questions in the Q&A button, please, for questions, so it can be easier categorized and we go through it. You can use the chat any button for good mornings if you have any issues with the audio and video. Let me tell you that it's transmitted the webinar directly to YouTube. So it can be found there as well in our website of Fire Risk to be taken. And it can be watched again afterwards if you want. We're going to send certificates of attendance to all that you are here with us and anybody joining in a bit. So please bear with us. So you will get it into your emails in a few days. And you can check our social media and website for upcoming webinars. I think the same is also for Silvanus. We are coming up towards the end of both projects, our completion of a very hard work from everybody. So we will, just a moment, please. So we are gonna present our results, and we are very excited to present everything, the hard work that everybody has done. Now, we continue with, I wanna pass the speech to Professor Domingos Viegas, our coordinator in fire risk, who is leading us towards the success of the project, and to say a few words.
Thank you very much, Clelia. I'm very pleased to participate in this second webinar of the joint webinar of both projects. And first of all, I'd like to greet also our colleagues from Silvanus and from other projects that are participating in this common effort of networking, of sharing knowledge and sharing results and discussing ideas to go along together in this endeavor to better understand the problem of wildfires. I'd like also to thank in particular to Clelia and all my colleagues that are putting this webinar together, and I greet the speakers for their effort. The Fire Risk Project, as you know, it has been a very large project running now for 4 years, and we are about to finish the project next month, in the end of March. The same happens with Silvanus, so we are together in this history. Now we are in a stage of disseminating our results, the results of our study. As you know, Fire Risk was a project in which we aim to understand better the risk of fire, understand all its components, all its elements, and the links between the different processes, and how we could assess the risk, how we could mitigate the risk, and how we could adapt ourselves to the future challenges. In the previous webinar, we presented the overall structure of the project and also some general results that we obtained already. This webinar is dedicated in particular to one component that is of risk mitigation. That is the very important issue of fuel management. And in our project, we developed it quite extensively, looking at the capacity of fuel reduction with using different techniques, single together. And I think this will be shown not only for the present conditions or in all Europe, but also adapted to the future situations that we expect to have with the climate change and with the socio-economic changes. With this, I think that I don't want to take more time. I think it is now time to listen to the other speakers. Thank you, Claudia.
Thank you, Professor Viegas. Okay, we're gonna move towards the first presentation for this webinar. Our colleague in Fire Risk, Alex Neidermeyer, is presenting on behalf of BU Amsterdam her research performed under Fire Risk. So I'm gonna pass the floor to Alex, and go ahead.
Thank you. Let me just get my slideshow up here. Does that look okay?
No, it's in edit mode, Alex.
Oh, it's still okay. Sorry about that. How about now?
Yeah.
Okay, good, great. Well, good morning, everyone. I'm pleased to be the first presentation today. Yep, my name is Alex Niedermeyer, a very German name for a very American lady. Kalia, good try with the pronunciation. And I'm going to tell you a little bit about my work for my PhD at the Vrije Universiteit in Amsterdam, funded by the Fire EU Risk Project. And this is a bit more on the theoretical side. And then I think some of the other presentations will be more on the ground sort of research. So we're going to look at long-term fuel management in Europe, and specifically some insights from the Fire EU Risk Project. So first, I'll tell you a little bit about the role of land management in fire dynamics. And I apologize ahead of time if I insult your intelligence, because you already know all of these things, but you can just bear with me. And assess our current options for living with and managing wildfires. Again, more from the theoretical side. Whoops. And then see how we can develop storylines to imagine what future landscapes could look like. And then how we can translate those storylines into modeling parameters to see how different fuel and land management strategies could affect fire risk. So if you don't know anything about modeling, this is a safe presentation. It's okay. So as we probably all already know, a lot of where fire generates in European landscapes is through land abandonment, especially in Southern Europe, and also through climate change. But as I work more on the land management, land use side of things, looking specifically from that perspective, we can say that things like the decrease of farming activity, so when farmers leave their lands, the decrease of pastoral activities, rural outmigration, young people move to the cities, reforestation, and these sorts of drivers increase fuels on the landscape and create a greater risk, more fuel for fire. So I have this little picture of tinder kindling and fuel because, of course, as you know, some of these smaller fuels can be very risky, and those abandoned lands especially can initially start with a lot of very dense, brushy fuel, and that can pose a big problem. So coming from that perspective, what can we do to manage fuels? You probably already know of a lot of these. Of course, there's grazing. A nice picture of little cows in the Netherlands, reducing some of the fine fuels. There's prescribed burn, which is used in a lot of places in Southern Europe, illegally or not. There's also actually removing fuels, so more of a silvicultural approach where you select trees to remove from the forest and create more space. But where actually can we do these activities? Do we have an idea to maybe tell policymakers this is where there are opportunities to use these land management strategies that actually help address fuel buildup on the landscape? So that was the first study for me as part of this project, where we combined different suitability factors to find out, for example, for herbivory or for grazing, what are the conditions necessary to make an area suitable to use herbivory to reduce fuels. And so what you see in this map on the left is the areas that are darker are less suitable, and the areas that are lighter are more suitable. So no surprise, Northern Europe, there's not so many animals that could put up with those kind of climates. So the other factors that we used included the locations of different species of wild ungulates, like deer, that can also manage those fine fuels, where there's already livestock. And for all of the land management strategies that we looked at, areas that are accessible for farmers, fire managers, whoever, to access to do these strategies. For mechanical removal, you can see it's a little bit of a different picture. There's a lot of Central Europe that is accessible or where it's suitable to do mechanical removal. but higher elevation areas, it's difficult to get the machinery up. So we set that as a limiting factor. And then finally, for prescribed burn, we did something a little bit simpler, and we used an index of days, a greater number of days in which it's actually possible to do a prescribed burn. So it's not too hot, not too windy, not too cold, and how often were those days occurring in the last 10 years, and then we aggregated them. So these maps don't mean that you can't do these land management strategies in any of the areas that we said aren't suitable, but it just means that the conditions for doing them are maybe more challenging. But even knowing that, how can we use that? If we do that management strategy now, what effects could that have on future wildfire? Well, we have an idea of where current land systems are, where how we're currently using the land, where are the grasslands, where's extensive, permanent crops or high intensity cropland, where are the forests, which is the map that you're seeing here. But of course, ideally, we would have a time machine and we could just go to the future and see what happens. But unfortunately, despite my interest in science fiction, this has not been yet made available. There are no time machines. So we have to get a little bit more creative. And fortunately for my love of science fiction, a lot of very prominent scientists in the world have worked together to create essentially science fiction stories of what the future could hold. So different storylines of what could happen. So perhaps like in the first scenario, which is called Shared Socioeconomic Pathway 1, or the Green Road, perhaps Europe becomes more sustainable. We reduce emissions, we increase renewable energy, transportation is greener, all of these sorts of things. There's also a business as usual scenario that's basically we keep doing what we're doing now. And then SSP3 is called regional rivalry. So there's still more fossil fuel energy use, not so much public transportation, and there's not much of an effort to curb emissions. So this is helpful in imagining, all the different possibilities of the futures that we could have. But of course, we are scientists. We need some numbers to go with these storylines. And so we can adapt those specifically to tell us things that would be relevant to what our landscapes might look like in the future. So from these storylines, from the sustainability storyline and the regional rivalry storyline, we can say something about economic development. Well, we think that economic development could increase if we're on a greener pathway. Lots of jobs will open up associated with green energy, lots of working between countries in Europe, this sort of thing. But in SSP3, things are a little bit more stagnant and inwardly focused within countries. Environmental standards would probably go up in SSP1, but down in SSP3. So we can kind of parameterize these sort of changes. And the big takeaway that's important for fire management from the shared socioeconomic pathways, for SSP1, we anticipate better land management, which is great for fire risk. So these abandoned lands, for example, we anticipate that there would be policy that would encourage people to manage them better, or to, whatever it might be, do more reforestation, reduce carbon, all of these sorts of things that would also impact climate, for example. While SSP3 would have more fractured land management. Okay, and then the numbers, we have to get to the numbers. So then we take all that information and we put actual numbers to it. And so the things that are, I think, most important here for fire are first the population amounts. They break up Europe into these 4 sections that you can see: North Europe, Eastern Europe, Western Europe, Southern Europe. And in Southern Europe, for example, the population is anticipated to increase pretty significantly. Well, that's going to put more people closer to the wildland-urban interface. That's probably dangerous for the cause of wildfires. And also in SSP1, we're anticipating a lot more green, more trees, more vegetation, because all those things are good for locking in carbon, right? But they're also flammable, unfortunately. So now we're getting an idea of how we turn these storylines into numbers. And then, in addition to liking science fiction, I also like board games. So I use this board game that maybe you're familiar with called Settlers of Catan to kind of get you in the mindset of how we can model this. So we use a model in my group called Cluemondo or DynaClue. And essentially we take all this information, all of these numbers, and in some ways we have like different players of this game. They have certain resources. There are certain places where you can or you cannot get these resources from. There's certain rules of the games about what can change, what cannot change. And so Cluemondo essentially puts all of this into a very ugly computer program, actually. It doesn't look as nearly as nice as Settlers of Catan. And we put all of these things in there: suitability, the historic trends, maybe there's protected areas that can't convert to croplands, a neighborhood influence, like where there's cities now, maybe there will be more of those cities, kind of urban sprawl around it. So those places are more likely to convert to urban. And then these huge global economic models that even what's happening in China and how that might affect Europe under these different storylines. So we put that all together, the model crunches it, and we come out with something like this, these maps of Europe. The first column you can see under SSP1 in the year 2050, this is what comes out for where settlements will be. So, Western Europe, of course, increases in the number of cities and things. But what is sort of surprising, since we anticipate also an increase in population under this more sustainable pathway, places like Sardinia and in Southern Europe also get more people, which can create more danger. Also in Northern Europe, we get more forest intensification. Well, that could be a little bit dangerous for fire, of course, too, right? And then finally, in the last column, these are shrublands, and we see some intensification and extensification of shrublands in Southern Europe. Shrubs are those really tiny little branches and things, quite dangerous for fire. So how do we put this all together to say something about what fire risk is going to look like? Time machine? No, fortunately not still. If you're having a flashback to your school of learning about the cycles of nature, the carbon cycles and everything, don't panic. Fortunately, we have these nice models called dynamic global vegetation models that, incredibly to me, put everything about an ecosystem and everything about fire dynamics all into one thing. And so they basically parameterize all of this. Oops. And we get this model called LPJML Spitfire. So it has a land use component, a vegetation modeling component, and then it also says something about what fire will do in that landscape. And so we're using this for the final study as part of this project to create different scenarios of fuel management. So let's say we target those very small fuels, like the sticks, the leaves, the grass, things like that, and we remove a certain amount of those from the landscape. Will that reduce fire risk? What if we get larger fuels? What if we remove whole trees from some landscapes? Will that really reduce fire risk significantly? Does it make a difference if the climate follows different pathways? Does it make a difference if we follow this more sustainable road or this more regional rivalry, less sustainable road? And then we give all of this to the model, to LPJML Spitfire, along with the land use, and it crunches all of these, all this information about fire forests, how much burned area, how intense will the fires be, how fast will they spread, all of these sorts of things. And just to give you a very short overview of what we have found so far, interestingly, removing the very small fuels has far and away the biggest impact on reducing burned area, especially in Southern Europe. So what you see in this upper left-hand corner map, all those areas in blue are areas that when you remove a big chunk I think it was 15% of 1 hour fuels, small fuels. All of these areas in blue decrease the amount of burned area they have. And oddly enough, when you decrease the slightly larger fuels, the 10-hour fuels, so more like sticks and things like that, you get an increase in burned area. So even more than the difference between these socioeconomic scenarios, sustainability, rivalry, whatever it is, what you see on the right is that it's really the removal of the very small fuels has by and large the largest impact on reducing burned area. So in summary, to finish up, so land use, especially land abandonment in Southern Europe, and climate are really driving new fire dynamics in Europe. In our management options, there are many of them. The ones that we studied are prescribed burn, grazing, and fuel removal. We can use scenarios to help us visualize the consequences of our management decisions now on fuels, on landscapes, on policies, by translating the stories into numbers, essentially. And then the findings from our study indicate that managing fine fuels is probably our best bet, regardless of where our story goes. We're more sustainable or not, you still have to manage fine fuels. And that is the end of my presentation.
Thank you, Alex. I have already expressed, but I'll say it again. I love the way you present. Seriously, everything clear with a story. You're always saying a story as you.
It's the high school science teacher coming out in me, you know. Let me see if I can.
Thank you so much. So now, as we heard the theory, let's say, set up very nicely and explained very nicely by Alex, we're gonna see some practice, let's say some case studies. So in this session, we're gonna have presenting or talking through Krishna Chardamuri, who is the partner in Silvanus, actually the technical director of Silvanus, along with Elias Tsiritsis from the World Wildlife Fund of Greece, talking us about a case study in Greece. And for the case study in Portugal, Tiago Domingos from Terra Prima. So I'm gonna let Krishna to rule this session, go through this session.
Thank you. Thank you, Clelia. I think more from Silvano's perspective, we have been blessed to have many different pilots. And you can also see me now. And one of two case studies that we selected, which would be most appropriate, given the challenges and the landscape of the problem that we are currently handling, is one from Greece, and to complement it, one from Portugal. So I'm not going to take much time in discussing about the context of Silvanus, which we did in the last webinar. So I will briefly introduce the speakers, give the context, and then let them take over the floor and present the case study in detail, as they are the experts. So first we have Elias. I'm not going to pronounce the second name. I'm sorry for that. Works as a coordinator of wildfire prevention at the Conservation Department of WWF Greece. He holds a BSc in political science from University of Social and Political Sciences, Athens. And he has been a volunteer firefighter for 24 years. And here are some pictures I was able to find where the case study of Greece has been presented. But with that, I will then pass the floor to Elias for the detailed description of the Greek pilot case study. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Krishna. I'm going to share my screen and to begin my presentation. Okay, I think it's all okay. Is my presentation visible? Okay, all right. So,
yeah, please.
So I'm Elias Tsiritsis. I'm a Forest Fires Actions Coordinator from WWF Greece. I'm going to explain you the paradigm of Greece in prescribed burning with our colleagues from the Institute of Mediterranean Forest Ecosystems, that we are one team in this project. Firstly, some basic trends for Greece. Greece is a fire-prone country, is a country that suffers every year from forest fires, from wildfires. So we try to seek new ways in order to manage forest fuels, to decrease the intensity of forest fires, and to manage forest fires. This is some basic trends for forest fires in Greece. What happens with the prescribed burning in Greece? We used to be pioneers. Some actions for prescribed burning, for implementation of prescribed burning in Greece started in 70s and 80s, where some people from forest departments start to think about what we are going to do with forest fuels. It was a period that fires started to increase in Greece, so these people started to ask themselves what we are going to do now and in the future. So the first attempts of introducing prescribed burning were in the 70s and 80s. But without constant funding, legal support, clear objectives, or political will, these sporadic attempts stopped. And so this effort from 70s and 80s ended there, and all this effort was abandoned. So from a country that we were pioneers in Europe, we were the last ones in the effort of implementing prescribed burning in Greece. Realizing this situation and from a crazy idea of Miltiades Athanasiou from the Institute of Mediterranean Forest Ecosystems, where we are in strong contact with him in forest fires. One day he said to me, okay, let's bring back this idea and let's do it happen and try to introduce prescribed burning as a new trend in fire prevention in Greece. This idea created this pilot project, the 2 years pilot project in Chios Island from June 2021 to June 2023 in several plots in Chios. Chios is an island in the Aegean, in North Aegean, and the basic element with Chios is that we can meet a lot of ecosystems that we can use, we can meet in all regions of Greece. So Chios, it was a very good canvas for us with Frigana, with scrublands, with forests, with pine forests. So what we did in Chios, it could be easily introduced in other areas that they are fire prone in Greece. Chios has another strong element, the cooperation between different stakeholders and very powerful volunteer firefighters that help us in this project. Through these efforts, prescribed burning was successfully demonstrated. A lot of publications and presentations in journals and in conferences in the country and outside the country, and the results provided from the implementation of our pilot project in Chios could be implemented in other forest ecosystems in Greece. And we created a very good basis for applying the method in the country, although we need more research and we need to do scale up from this pilot effort in Chios. Now we are in the procedure of scale up the effort in Evia and in other regions in order to produce more data and in order to introduce prescribed burning in Greece stage by stage. What we achieved in Chios, we built a strong local and national stakeholder strategy alliance with volunteers, with our donor Procter & Gamble, with the municipality of Chios, with the forest department of Chios, with fire brigade of Chios, which were partners in this project. We successfully implement the pilot project in specific areas. We disseminate the results to the scientific community in national level. We communicate objectives to general public in order to give the option to the public that there are not only bad fires, but there are good fires too, and we can use fire for management purposes. And now we have created a financial proposal to scale up the effort, a legal adoption of prescribed burning to policymakers, and a practical guide with specifications and recommendations to implement the prescribed burning in national level. So we are now in the stage to convince policymakers that we must have introduction of prescribed burning in Greece as an effective prevention tool, but not only as a prevention tool, but as a management tool too. And we have prepared all the legal documents and financial documents and the technical documents in order to convince policymakers to do the step ahead. Because prescribed burning now is not permitted or not forbidden in Greece, there is a legal gap. There is a gap of knowledge in stakeholders, and with this pilot project, we try to create to fill the gaps in the law gaps and in knowledge. And I end my presentation. It was very short, but I don't want to get the advantage of my time with the thing that prescribed burning needs cooperation and needs strong alliances. And this is something that we have as a clue from HEOS, different stakeholders, different people, different opinions, different images, but with one goal: to investigate, to do research, and to implement prescribed burning in Greece as an effective tool for fire prevention and management of the landscape, which is the most critical thing in the future of forest fires in Greece. Thank you very much.
Many thanks, Elias. I think it was very insightful to get a practical experience on how to perform prescribed burning. There's a huge discussion about the threats and the dangers, but again, as you rightly mentioned, there is a historical context that we need to take into account. So to continue along with the second pilot study, we have Professor Tiago Domingos, who has a PhD in environmental engineering from IST, and is also an associate professor in environment and energy at IST. Tiago Domingos is also the founder and CEO of Terra Prima. And here you can see some images where some interesting insights we are going to learn about what pilot activities were carried out and how the adoption of integrated wildfire management has been successfully carried forward in Portugal. So Professor Domingos, the floor is over to you. Thanks.
Okay, thank you. And thank you for the invitation and for the opportunity to present our work. So let me just share the presentation. Okay, so I'll be talking about integrated forestry management at Quinta da França, which is the farm managed by Terra Prima. So just to get a geographic location. So this is Mediterranean area, specifically Portugal. And as you can see here, in central Portugal, and this farm here in the municipality of Covilhã. And what we're talking about here is mostly the management. It's what you see here. This is in fact Portugal's highest mountain range, the Serra da Estrela. That's the Covilhã city over there. And what we're talking about is the management of this mixed forest, but which is dominated by the native Pyrenean oak. So what we've been developing there at Quinta da França, and which has been integrated as integrated and much further developed within the Silvanus project, is integrated management at the three stages: prevention and preparedness, detection and response, and restoration, with in fact mostly an emphasis on phases A and C. And I'll be telling you about these multiple components that you see here, that we've been fitting all of them together in our management of Quinta da França. So the first place is that to a central component of our approach is to leverage modern technologies for the monitoring and management of the system. So the whole farm, which in fact has both agricultural areas, which are here close to the two rivers to which it is adjacent, and then it has the forestry area here in the eastern part, and which is of the highest altitude. The whole farm is covered by a LoRa network, which provides us with communication capacities such that we can insert any type of sensors, both for the grazing animals in the forest and for the soils and for fire detection and so on. They can all be integrated in a local network without any further costs. And then all of this information is stored in a server, which is then accessed conventionally. So we have data collection all over the farm, and namely we have data collection in the forest area. And this picture allows me to introduce to you the central experiment that we are running and on which we are real life scale experiment, which we are running and on which everything then else is based. And this experiment is that around 25 years ago, we started restoring this native Pyrenean oak forest that we are now managed. And in 2017, we split this area, which was 200 hectares, into two equal areas of 100 hectares, one which is grazed, which you see here on the left, and one which is non-grazed, which you see here on the right. So what we're running is essentially a large-scale controlled ecological experiment about the effects of grazing, but then also not so systematically, this is the main experiment, but then also all our other components of integrated management. So as I said, a strong component of what we're doing is the use of remote sensing, and remote sensing means in the first place drone flights for high resolution that allow us very, very detailed land cover mapping of what is going on. Of course, drone flights are more expensive, they require labor. It's cheaper, but with a lower resolution, to use also satellite imagery, which is what you see here, which allows us much more frequent monitoring and the use of namely vegetation indexes to have a fine understanding of what is going on in this forest area. We also use proximal sensing, both for soils, for climate, and to track the animals, which are our central management tool. And that's about talking about monitoring. Now, talking about management directly, intervention. So besides having this big split in which half of the area is grazed and half of the area is not grazed, within each of these areas, then we have multiple strategies for fuel control. One of them is the prescribed fire, which we've started, in fact, within the context of Sylvanos. We started this last year. It is based on a zonal planning of the more adequate areas for prescribed fire. And I must say, this is something, as I said, we just started this 1 year ago with the Sylvanos project. So we are still in a learning process of the advantages, the costs, where prescribed fire is more applicable and where it is less applicable. As I said, what we have is a comprehensive strategy where we use multiple fire control strategies. Prescribed fire is just one of them. And what we want is to leverage this portfolio of solutions. We also have a systematic network of fire breaks, which are maintained every year. You can see here a picture of one of them. So they're basically routes that also allow management to move around the forest area for management purposes, and also when necessary for firefighting, but they also act as fire breaks. Another strategy that we use besides prescribed fire and grazing is mechanical scrub control. In fact, this is one of the main comparisons that we make, because on the grazing side, all of the vegetation control is done with the animals, and on the non-grazed side, the main component of control, besides the prescribed fire that we are now introducing, is the mechanical control, of which you can see some pictures here. It is done strategically in particularly places of particularly high amount of shrub vegetation. It is always done, as you see here, with a shredder, with no soil tillage. So this is a very high priority we have on preserving the soil. And of course, this also makes it's more expensive than if the control was done with tillage, because the recurrence period is higher, since it's not so destructive for the vegetation. But that's an overall option that we're taking, not make interventions that have deleterious effects on the soil. We also have selective tree pruning and debranching up, which you can see very clearly in this picture, up to a certain height, to avoid to reduce fire propagation. The picture you're seeing here, and this is where we do this selective tree pruning, is only in the non-grazed areas, because one of the strong results that we found from the grazing, which we do with cattle, and it's relevant to say that it's cattle, it's not sheep or goats. So cattle are, as you know, very sizable animals. And one of the things that cattle have is that, besides the fact that they eat the grass and so reduce that fine fuel, it's the purely mechanical effect that they have of trampling the shrubs, and they like to scratch themselves against the trees. So this reduction of the lower canopy of the trees that here you see in the non-grazed area, done by us with, of course, labor costs for doing this, is done in the grazed area by the cattle themselves. And then here we now have our experiments with prescribed fire, which again we're using in the non-grazed area, because we don't need to do it in the grazed area. So you have here the different pictures of the process, and also here illustrations of the fact that a well carried out prescribed fire done in winter. It is a cold fire that will just burn the fuel load, but will not affect the just below the burnt surface. We will still have, as you can see in this small inset here, you will still have the dead leaves and the progressively decaying layer of plant material that will be incorporated into the soil. And I emphasize again, as I said before, it is a very strong priority for us, as it is, I think, all over the Mediterranean, that everything we do in terms of forest management must promote and improve the conditions of soils, and not reduce those conditions. And so here you see then the after effects after the prescribed fire. So a very significant reduction in fuel load. What we've learned already with what we've done with the prescribed fire, especially for our conditions, and this is something that I would like to emphasize, which is we are very interested, and we're actively working in that direction, in developing a heterogeneous, complex ecosystem that becomes closer to the pristine native ecosystem that we would have. And what are the consequences of this is that we get very heterogeneous situations. We're also working with a mixed forest. In fact, here you see pines, so we have places with pines, just as you saw in previous pictures, you saw cypresses. So we are doing developing mixed forests with ecological and economic advantages. But these advantages that come from the heterogeneity of the multiple patches that we have, what we found is that in terms of prescribed fire, they are a disadvantage that we have to live with, because they don't allow us to do prescribed fire on large continuous extents, which is very important because of the relevant labor requirements of prescribed fire. To have a controlled fire, even in winter, you need continuous fuel load, and in a similar way, and in ways where the prescribed fire will not have an effect on the canopy. And so many of the areas that we have are in fact not amenable to the prescribed fire. And so it ends up having to be done in small patches, which has higher labor requirements. Also, so that we make sure that it is done in a very controlled way and doesn't lead to any damage. And finally, the main component of the management, which, as I said, happens on half the area and where we are systematically comparing the effects, which is the grazing by cattle. Of course, and you can see this quite well illustrated here on the left. The cattle do not eliminate the undergrowth; they just reduce it, significantly reducing the fire risk. And in fact, from the ecological point of view, this is in a sense the best situation. Not the best one in terms of fire control, but in ecological terms, yes, because ecologically it is important that we still have the three strata, the trees, the shrubs, and the grasses. What we just need to have them is with a reduction in the biomass of the shrubs and a reduction in terms of the vertical continuity between the lower levels and the trees, so that if fire does come up, it does not easily spread to the trees. And that is something that the cattle are, in fact, very effective at doing. And with that, I finish. Thank you very much.
Many thanks, Professor Domingos. I think one of the lessons that we learned from our pilot activities in Silvanus is also to look at the global impact of different pilot case studies. And visiting Australia, where we had a lot of interest in adopting the prescribed burning as a methodology, and hearing the native tribes speak about the impact of prescribed burning and how the prescribed burning is used to enhance the biodiversity of the land creation. And especially the example that you presented to show that the insects just below the surface of the soil is very well protected. I mean, that example really reminds me of the very similar case study that was presented to us in Australia, where the natural, let's say, habitat of a forest ecosystem, some of the seeds don't sprout, and thus creating an environment where there could be an invasive species taking over the forest. And because of this fire, a prescribed burnt fire that is being performed, the sprouts do get opened up. And that opening up of process will then allow us to regenerate the natural habitat and preventing any invasive species taking over the landmass. So thank you very much for the presentation, and also providing all the details in a very systematic and clear way. With that, Clea, I will now pass the floor back to you. And and then we'll be here for the rest of the webinar.
Thank you, Krishna. Thank you, Elias. Thank you, Professor Thiago Domingos. Great representation of land management, how can help in fire prevention, in wildfire prevention, because we are in a stage that we really need to be considering more and more, and included also in our policies and our reviews in European state, but also in national state. Talking also from Cyprus, another country that struggles every summer from wildfires, multiple wildfires at the same time. And fire prevention for me, it needs to have the same level of importance as firefighting, if not a bit more, because if we do the prevention correctly, then we're not going to have extreme fires to fight. And a saying that a colleague from Fire Juris keeps saying that, and I think it's Alex actually first said it, that not all fires are bad fires. We need to consider that. We need to use fire as a toolbox, not to fight it always. Okay, we're going to have also some time later for discussion, but now we're going to move on to a presentation by Dr. George Sarkas from the Center of Security Studies, GEMEA in Greece. And George has specialities in seismology, geological sustainability, and geotechnical studies, which is going to help us through this discussion.
Yeah, thank you, Clea. Just to say that the last 6, 7 years, I don't remember exactly. I had the chance to follow the disaster management now approach dealing with various hazards. Give me just 2 seconds to share a bit my screen to find the right window.
Go ahead.
Okay, share. I hope that you can see it now in the presentation mode.
Not yet. Now.
Okay.
Now, yes.
Okay, just to say a few words, following what you said about bad fires and good fires, and follow actually the excellent presentation of Professor Tiago Domingos. This is, let's say, one of work of Silvanus that is not so known because we have seen for Silvanus a lot of technological stuff. You may also see our Silvanus here or there, but just to tell you that one of the big aspects that Silvanus deals about rehabilitation, recovery, and in general policy issues about wildfires. And luckily this last years with my colleague, Dr. Nikolaos Kalapodis, who, let's say, originally would do this presentation, but unfortunately, okay, due to some light health issues, he will not do the presentation, but he's here with us. We're working a lot on these policy aspects on wildfires for prevention, for suppression and restorations. So here at Silvanus, we would like, let's say, to give you an example about combining the integrated fire management and close to nature forest management approaches as a holistic, let's say, approach of to reduce the risk of wildfires. I'm just now showing something very typical. Many of you may have seen it. Many of you either have not seen it. According, let's say, to the Paris Agreement, now we have actually, if you look here on the down and a bit left, we're already around 1.1 degrees of Celsius on a global, on average global temperature, comparing to the let's say to the 19th and 20th century. And we do have a target, of the Paris Agreement to reach a limit of about 1.5 degrees of Celsius. Unfortunately, to be honest, I was reading a few hours before this webinar, a Greek article in a Greek journal that said probably we have missed this target, but let's hope that we are not going to miss it. So from this, let's say, impacts of climate change, we are probably, due to the various scenarios also that Alex showed us in her presentation, we do have, let's say, more strict and more wildfire regimes. And actually, we're living on a feedback loop, let's say, from the climate, from the rising temperatures, the forests are already suffering, and we have seen this with the very huge wildfires in Europe and worldwide. And due to the drier conditions and the, let's say, growing longer seasons that are, let's say, favorable to wildfires. And at the same time, these wildfires emit, let's say, more carbon dioxide to the atmosphere. And then we are, let's say, in a loop that can never end. But we have to do something to, to stop this loop. Right. I'm not going to stay more on this because probably all of you have seen it, and you have seen what has happened, let's say, the last 4 or 5 years. We're just showing an image from 2023 of Europe on the wildfire that have been, let's say, occurred and have burned major land.
George, sorry, we are
Yeah.
hearing twice. I think we're hearing you twice.
Twice? What do you mean?
I am hearing you again in my headphones, so I don't know if there is maybe something in the office.
There's some kind of an echo, or
yes.
you are here. The journalist. Okay, give me a sec. Costa. Okay, maybe I don't know, something with my mic or something with an echo. I'm not sure.
I think
or
we
another voice,
we
maybe
are
somebody
hearing
else in the office
yeah,
talking.
we are hearing someone behind you.
Yes.
Our usual problem then. Okay. No, I think that you're not hearing someone now. Okay. Now let's pass to to start to go deeper, where let's say we know that traditional firefighting methods are often, let's say, insufficient to control, let's say, these increasingly intense and frequent extreme wildfires. So as these fires, let's say, go beyond the conventional suppression tactics that we know, the integrated fire management can have, let's say, provide a critical solution to this problem, because it is a holistic strategy that considers ecological, socioeconomic, and technical, let's say, elements of fire management, with a broader aim to build resilient, sustainable landscapes and communities. And let's say, instead of using, instead of solely combat fire, like fire is something bad, IFM, the integrated fire management, strategically uses it's a method to use for prevention, suppression, and ecological restoration. And let's say the whole concept is that this approach minimizes the negative impacts of wildfires, fires in general, but tries to, to harness the benefits, the good role of fire. And that's the whole concept, let's say, behind it. In general, let's say, the integrated fire management represents a fundamental shift from reacting, let's say, to wildfires to proactively managing them in, let's say, in harmony with the natural process. It's a more, let's say, natural solution to our problem. Okay, yeah, I changed, yeah, I pressed the button, but I didn't want. Okay. After, if you remember, probably most of you should remember, because you are from, many of you are from Portugal. After the, let's say, the really devastating fires we had in Portugal in 2017, the European Union, let's say, published this sparking fire smart policies in the year 2018, with a thorough review of 2 decades of fire research that investigated innovative strategies. And let's say, crucially, the report policy recommendations highlighted the need, the importance of sustainable forest management, including controlled use of fire for both fuel management and suppression. So you can see one of the, let's say, policies suggested here with the red cycle. This emphasizes the development of an integrated fire management approach and strategy for managing combustible forest material. Unlike, let's say, limiting the efforts to fire prevention and suppression, the integrated fire management strategy adopts the more holistic framework encompassing all 4 phases of emergency management, of disaster management, if you want, from the prevention to preparedness, response, and recovery. Okay, yeah, I hope that. Also, yes, we have, let's say, as a backbone, the theoretical, let's say, backbone in Europe, we have the new EU forest strategy that provides a framework for protecting and sustainably, let's say, managing forests, notably shifting, let's say, from traditional fire suppression to more comprehensive integrated fire management policies, which is, let's say, aligned with the EU Green Deal and forest strategy for 2030, strongly emphasizes the enhancement of forest resilience against climate change. Now, the strategy includes actions to increase the size and improvement of the conditions of forests in Europe, of course, strengthening their protection, the restoration, resilience, and adaptation of them to the new challenges from climate change, such as the extreme weather, let's say, phenomena and increased variability. These actions prioritize boosting the socioeconomic contributions of forests within sustainable limits, safeguarding and expanding forest ecosystems, and improving monitoring and reporting. Excuse me. Now, a key principle that is by reducing, let's say, wildfire risk depends on implementing sustainable forest management practices. The peer-reviewed assessment framework of, let's say, wildfires that took place in Europe in 2023 by the Union Civil Protection Mechanism actually highlights the importance of nature-based solution in the system. And these solutions are, let's say, usually the traditional grazing, as we saw from the case in Portugal, some forestry techniques, crop mosaics, and let's say reducing the overall risk. At the same time, let's say again in 2023, the landscape fire governance framework emphasizes again the importance and the critical role of integrated fire management into the sustainable landscape management. It advocates for governance models that involve diverse stakeholders, integrate scientific and cultural knowledge, the values also takes into account political considerations in order to manage risk effectively. And this report actually proposes developing international guiding principles to improve wildfire management effectiveness. Now, in addition, also a policy brief, as you can see on the right part of your screen, the Reducing Wildfire Risk in Europe through Sustainable Forest Management was also again published in the year 2023, which, let's say, it's another voice, an additional voice that recognizes the role of sustainable forest management for the reduction of wildfire risk. And with this, let's say, we pass to the big, let's say, topic of sustainable forest management. For example, we have, let's say, single species of conifer plantation, for example, in Finland or in Sweden, that have been, let's say, are there to produce high quality timber. But unfortunately, these are monoculture approaches that can compromise sustainability. Also, another example is that in the Mediterranean regions in the southern Europe, we do have, let's say, again, monocultures that decrease the resilience of forests to wildfires, increasing their frequency and intensity. And let's say, furthermore, to all of this, we do have increasing drought events, such as the one of 2018, which are expanding, let's say, the wildfire risk into traditionally vulnerable areas like Central and Northern Europe. We're recognizing now these challenges. This is the issue. The European Union, the European Commission, by recognizing these challenges, introduced the closer to nature forest management approach in 2023 again, practically offering a guiding framework for forest management that can provide biodiversity and adaptation to climate change, and also, let's say, giving the route to align with the EU Green Deal targets. The closer to nature forest management, the 7 principles that you see here on the left, actually aim to bolster the ability of forests to provide diverse ecosystem services, including timber production, biodiversity conservation, wetland preservation, water quality maintenance, recreation, and carbon sequestration and storage. Now, again, the policy, the sparking fire smart policies in the EU from 2018, also one, let's say, in the main policy recommendations, highlighted the need to support the proactive prevention measures adapted to local socioeconomic and environmental context. Now, in this, let's say, framework, a sustainably managed forest is also, let's say, more resilient to disturbances such as wildfires. Conversely, good wildfire risk reduction practices also promote more resilient forest landscapes and reduce the threat of damage and loss to forests and the community that depends on the forests. The resilience, resistance, and adaptive capacity of current and future, let's say, forest stands in the face of various natural disturbances including those caused by wildfires and climate change, can be significantly improved by enhancing the compositional, functional, structural, and genetic diversity, always where appropriate and possibly. This can be achieved by, let's say, moving and passing by from the typical even-aged monoculture, let's say, of conifers, which have, let's say, this huge potential to lead to a domino effect during wildfires, let's say, to a more uneven-aged mixed forests, something like that we have seen before, which incorporate a higher proportion of less flammable broadleaves and other fire-resistant, let's say, vegetation and trees, if you want, in more simple terms. Now, this transition, let's say, is feasible through the aforementioned silvicultural approaches and other appropriate management and restoration harvest practices, including, in this case, also the prescribed burning, as well as controlled clear cuttings, pruning, thinning, mastication, and let's say reduction of herbaceous fuels through other grazing or herbicides or even mechanical means. So in this way, as the various, let's say, species are affected in different ways, the risk from wildfires is mitigated and vulnerability of the individuals can be reduced. Now, this is the final, let's say, slide. What, let's say, Silvanos is proposing as a key takeaway, if you want. We need to ensure that the closer to nature forest management and the integrated forest management are not simply schematic systems, but rather they are based on a thorough understanding of the local conditions, the natural forest processes, and the fire ecology. This is very important because not, as we say, not one size fits all. So we don't want a solution that of the type of one size fits all, but we want a solution that is customized to the specific needs of specific different regions. So we want to combine, let's say, place-based strategies such as closer to nature silviculture, grazing, agroforestry, mechanical options for fuel removal and prescribed burns to reduce the load of fuels, the load from the vegetation, to enhance the forest resilience and mitigate these extreme fire behaviors that we have seen recently. And let's say we want to maximize its effectiveness by transforming or even restoring the forest ecosystems and fire regime to start something more stable, more consistent with the natural and typical characteristic conditions across, let's say, the various landscape. And let's say the closing remark is, as Kurt, the German, let's say, noted, that in spite of an understanding of the past and awareness of the present, definite knowledge fails. So this statement actually started to be more relevant than ever, highlighting the need to adapt to instability and uncertainty rather than relying solely on historical models in forest and fire management. And actually, we're closing now with our friend Silvanos. Many thanks specifically to my colleague Nikos, because he has done a very great job. Many thanks to Krishna for this, let's say, that Silvanos now is ending along with the other projects. And I think that we are trying to, to move on a solution, if you want, not solution, under quotation marks, but to do something more. Thank you. I have to stop sharing. Okay, yeah.
Thank you, George.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for the presentation. And Nicolas. Now, Krishna, back to you for introducing us the impact assessment framework from Silvanos.
Thanks, Leah, and thanks, George and Nicolas as well. This has been a very strong collaboration, which has led us to many different aspects, especially from the engineering side, also from the firefighter community, we have been able to bring together a lot of different viewpoints. I think this is something that we have been very privileged position. I'm sure Fire EU Risk and other projects have a very similar position as well, where the interdisciplinarity and viewpoints from different communities and members have been collected and consolidated. The question, I mean, now that we have seen two case studies and starting from Alex's presentation about the future and how the roadmap looks like, let's just take a, let's say, a bit complementary approach and then evaluate ourselves and put us on a pedestal and say, did we achieve the right outcomes for the community, and what lessons did we learn? And the real question going into the future is to ask ourselves, is this replicable? Whatever lessons we have learned and whatever presentations that we have seen so far, the practical experience and the knowledge we have gained, can it be replicated? And if you want to replicate it, what actions should you be taking into account? And how do we judge ourselves whether we have accomplished the right objective? So I will just take a few minutes to explain what we are currently doing. This is not a complete solution. It's more like a brainstorming activity. So I would expect a lot of criticism, questions, comments, feedback. This will really help us also to improve the quality of assessment and evaluation. Now, the title Impact Assessment Framework is directly related to the impact the Green Deal project set out that are expected to be achieved by 2030. And I will explain how we intend and aim to achieve those targets. But again, this will be an open discussion we can have at the end of the webinar as well. So let me go to the next slide. So just as a brief summary where we stand in Silvanus, we have developed many different technology solutions. And one key aspect of this technology is the DSS, the decision support system, that will allow us to evaluate and identify whether all the different elements of integrated fire management is put in place. But by and large, we are a technology-driven approach to solving the presence and, let's say, the three phases of the wildfire management. Now, the question is, what are those big, let's say, metrics that we needed to achieve? And these metrics that were the 8 metrics I'm presenting here, this was our target that was present in the part of the Green Deal program, to which Silvanus submitted a bid. EI stand for expected impact, starting from 1 to 8. The metrics were expected to be reached by 2030. We are in 2025, and the question is, are we on track to achieving these metrics? So some of these metrics are quite ambitious and challenging, not in terms of achieving it, but the question of how do you evaluate it? How do we measure it? Zero fatalities from wildfire has been one of the biggest driving force in which we wanted to ensure safety and security of the people, the citizens who are living in let's say, the corridors of potential wildfire incidents can be identified. But also, what about the health of the firefighters? How much emphasis we can provide to the health and monitor the long-term impact of continuous exposure to flames and toxic gases, toxic environment. Now, that again has a lot of different elements to it, but let us just assume that the goal of 2030 is to have zero fatalities. That will include the most comprehensive set of different considerations we need to have. Similarly, in 0% reduction in accidental fire ignition, by definition, it is accidental. And how do we even be conscious? And how do we categorize a fire incident to be accidental or non-accidental? Talking to firefighters, every single fire incident investigation leads into years, if not months. And having retrospective analysis and categorizing a specific fire incident as accidental or even malicious or any human intervention that was resulted in a fire incident is also quite challenging. Similarly, a lot of emphasis can be placed for every single metric, but collectively, thanks to our colleagues and partners from other projects, we have been looking at what are the ways in which we enhance our ability to monitor and measure, and how do we replicate, or what mechanisms we can develop that will allow other communities and other firefighter, let's say, organizations or even civil protection authorities to take into account the lessons, and is there a step forward that we can collectively take as a community to prevent any potential wildfire outbreaks. So that is the goal that we want to achieve. And what I'm going to talk about is some methodologies that we have adopted. We have success in delivering those methodologies. But of course, any further discussion would always be welcomed as well. As a first step, since we are a technology-driven project, what we undertook is to evaluate, let us put numbers to every single user product and what these numbers represent in practice. Because we are talking about algorithms are always easy to measure. You have a baseline you want to achieve, which is the ideal case, and these algorithms should match with certain baseline and provide a performance evaluation. And we need to have enough data to be able to, let's say, confidently present a high TRL or highly closer to market products that will deliver practical results. And that was achieved from the reports that we have gathered so far in terms of 95%, 98% accuracy, false detection rates, and all these technologies that's, let's say, quite easy to evaluate and measure. The second evaluation methodology that we adopted is to identify user surveys. Now, we are not just delivering a technology, but we also want to make sure the usability of the technology is quite good and whether these technologies are relevant. Because if you go to a firefighter on a field as an incident commander and say, you need to open your mobile phone, you need to check some information, you need to understand the information, and then you will be able to make decisions, the latency, the time delay that will create will always be a hurdle for them. So working with the people and working with the firefighters and gathering their feedback, their assessment, their opinion, what is the best way we want to ensure there is a technology uptake among the end users that are directly dealing with the fire and forest fires, and most importantly, the prevention phase as well. So that again feeds into the overall impact assessment framework. And finally, what are the lessons that we have learned, especially in the context of prevention phase, which I believe everybody can agree. Prevention is always better than response coordination. And even in response coordination, a higher level of alertness would be a much better way to coordinate the response for any potential or accidental or natural fire ignitions itself. So breaking the overall impact assessment into three main steps. The first one, technology assessment, will be done through academic literature, publications, and other forms. The user surveys, we have completed our pilots in December of 2024, and now we are in the process of finalizing the reports and materials, which will be published. But the key question that we wanted to take into account is, can we recommend a checklist, a guidelines that other firefighters or other community members can have an uptake, and whether this would give them a longer longevity in assessing the impact. So just as a recap, we have a lot of different tools that we needed to evaluate, and each tool has its own models and evaluation metrics, and it has been developed by some partner with different KPIs, different evaluation parameters. So we have done a very extensive analysis to create what I'm going to present next, which is still, let's say, a discussion that we need to have. So some of the times we are going to refer back to some UPs. So here is a reminder what these UPs will correspond. Because in a project, we have spent 3.5 years looking at these UPs, and you immediately know what certain UPs are, but it's not always the case for outside representatives. So now let's get to the substance, the meaty substance of the controversial topic I'm going to present. In this impact assessment, if you want to use any specific technology in a particular environment, we need to have data. And Silvanus is a very data-driven project, and I'm sure you all can agree that the more information that we collect from on-field devices and on-field sensors to better understand the nature and the threat of the fire or the environmental state, the easier it becomes. So taking that approach, what we started to put together as a question form in a question format, and also giving some recommendations to what these questions can correspond to. First question, do we have enough weather stations? Now, when we ask this question broadly going around different pilot cases, in some cases, we got the response, yes, we have. but without the information, how many is sufficient? Are we talking about one metric for an entire region? Are we talking about microclimate changes that could be present, that could exist in an environment? Are we talking about just a global scale? So when we drill down to that level of granularity and detail, then we come to understand, based on the geography of certain landscapes, it's not enough to have just one metric, one measurement, or one installation of weather station, but we need a lot more. The next question is how many you need to install at what perimeter or what distance? When do you think a sufficient justification will be given towards installing additional weather stations? Again, this is no one size fits all approach. It has to be measured on individual landscape by landscape basis, especially in a mountainous terrain, depending on the curvature of the landscape, depending on the elevation model, depending on the trees that are present, depending on the height of the canopy that we saw earlier. Every single parameter will account for how much distance one weather station can potentially cover. And the third question, do we have technologies to monitor a high-risk region? And what does technology represent? Is it a camera device? Is it a drone? Is it something else that we can continuously able to collect information? And how many firefighters are available in a particular high-risk area? Are there any firefighters? What is the approach? What is the distance it takes? What is the time it takes to respond to an incident? How do you validate an incident? So every single question or every single technology that was developed in Silvanus then translated into a question. And when we ask the end users to then complete this questionnaire, that based on the pilot case studies that we have conducted, we were then able to come to or develop a metric. That metric will then be able to quantify minimum requirements to achieve those expected impact assessment. So going into, let's say, more in detail about certain questions that we're asking, how many percentage, what is the percentage of firefighter ratio to citizens in a community, and what is the approach? Because some of these questions also start to elaborate and think or make the policymakers and the regional authorities to think about prevention phase, the risk assessment phase, but also it's about changing the attitude towards fire. I believe this questionnaire that can be sent to a wider audience could really help them to also analyze and be aware whether these questions do make sense, whether the answers do make sense for them. And do we have collaboration with citizens? I mean, how do citizens get information? Many people are on Twitter, but not everybody who's traveling to different parts will have the local channels being subscribed. So how do we engage? How do we tell them that there is a higher threat in a particular region where this information should be made available? And what is the average time to communicate fire risk levels to public? I mean, because we don't have this information in the mainstream media where we can easily get information. Every time there is a let's say a high temperature season or a summer season, we always talk about heat wave. But what does it mean for fires? What does it mean for the environment? It's not very much dealt, or it's not a topic that has been very popularly discussed. So we don't only ask questions, we also put some recommended metrics. I mean, these are just examples. We don't have any specific opinion at this moment. What metric should be a consideration? But this is something the community as a whole and all our colleagues can also think about, come up with some experiences. What would work, what will not work, and what measures will then allow us to enhance the overall resilience of the regional authorities. So then going a little bit further, how many training sessions are being conducted annually for firefighters? Is this something that you can put a number towards, metrics? And how do you assess the overall outcome of this training of the firefighters, and what type of training will be required? Whether a training is sufficient because of the changing nature of the environment, the changing nature of the climate, and the changing wind directions, unexpected rise in temperature that are not directly relevant or historically being associated to. What does that represent? And again, going into more in detail, do we have enough drones? I mean, investment always requires a public procurement policy. And talking to our colleagues, we understand that a drone procurement needs to be strongly justified. and the Civil Protection Authority should have the justification to justify the investment. It's not just going to be a one-to-one, let's say, approach. So in Silvanus, the development of technology has allowed us to show evidence, show proof that there are sufficient progress that has been made in technological sense. So when you have the drone, here is the output that you can be able to monitor and measure and make sure you have the improvement in the overall operation process to take place as well. And similarly, going beyond, what is the annual increase in surface area treated by prescribed fires? This could be a good measure. Do we see a progress in the area, in the surface area of the prescribed fire burning, and that has resulted in reduction in the overall fire ignition in the future, looking at the historical context? So we created this questionnaire to allow us to identify in which phase of this different phase A, B, and C, where this associated impact can be measured and monitored. So expected impacts are also part of the questionnaire. And do we have evacuation plans? I'm so happy to see that Professor Domingos, when he presented the fire breaks, he also introduced the concept of this will allow us to create access to pilot sites or the fire regions that are not directly be accessible. And we have to think about accessibility as a key restrictions at this moment, which I think is a very good insight to have as well. So going in more in detail, some more questions. I'm not going to go through every single question, but you can already see when you want to create and when you want to reach an impact of delivering the Green Deal objectives, I believe this methodology of asking this question, putting some numbers and extending this question to a larger and becoming more inclusive of many different interests and viewpoints, I think will definitely help us towards evaluating and assessing whether Europe as a whole is taking the right approach towards overall mitigation of any potential fire incident. Now, having said that, the last point that you will notice is the insurance. There is a huge community of debate going on whether the adoption of nature-based solutions can lead to a higher insurance protection or let's say allowing the insurance sector to also take some of the risk. This is an open question, and I'm sure if anybody from the audience has any interest in this topic or from the financial sector background or have been looking into nature-based solutions and what level of overlap that we can expect to have or what impact we can expect to have between the nature-based solution, the adoption of NBS solutions, and the protection and the treatment of wildfire and the protection or let's say the long-term impact on leading to enhanced or let's say strengthening the insurance community to give out money or to have an incentive to insure the forest. I think that would again be a very well received impact because at the end of the day, it's always about economy. How beneficial it is to invest in a small scale that will result in a long scale impact can also be continuously being monitored and measured. So with that, I believe I will just acknowledgement of Silvanus and also want to thank you for the opportunity to discuss about the impact as a whole, but thinking about 2030, let's look beyond 2040, 2050, what Alex presented. If we want to live with fire, if this is going to happen, let us also be a lot more prepared in analyzing and understanding what impact we can reach with the new projects and with new technologies and new projects. So thanks, Clea. I will stop and give you the floor now. Stop sharing.
Thank you, Krishna. Okay, now I hope you are still with us, everybody. I know it's long, a bit more left, but from the questions and everything I'm seeing, I can see the interest in the subject, which is great. Now, for the next session, which we just named it Joint Outcomes and Key Costs of Feedback from Fire Risk and Silvanus, I'm going to ask first Professor Domingo Viegas, coming to this conclusion, having the presentations, if he has any thoughts to share with us. And then the rest of the speakers, please open your microphones, maybe we can do like a Q&A between us now. So discussion starting from the story that Alex told us and up to this moment, the platform of Silvanus. Professor Viegas.
Thank you, Clelia. I thank for this opportunity for talking. I will restrict myself to the topics that were dealt in the webinar. As you know, in the Fire Risk Project, we dealt with many different topics, but what was presented today was part of the work that we did on flood management. And this is, of course, a fundamental aspect. And it was developed by our colleagues also from Silvanus and the different areas. What I would like to tell is that perhaps ask some questions. I was very happy with the experience that was shown about prescribed burning in Greece, in Chios Island. I have followed the situation in Greece and also in other countries where prescribed burn is not very well accepted. And I'm happy to see that it is extended. And I'd like to know how far it is. I know better the situation in Portugal. Tiago Domingos presented, let's say, some work, but in a very limited area. And Krishna asked, what is the scale of these studies? How can we scale up these studies? For example, I know that in Portugal, there is much greater effort to do prescribed burn, but even so, it is not reaching the targets that we would need to have a sufficient impact. And my last comment would address what Krishna presented about these assessment metrics, which is a very important topic. We know that the Green Deal program gave us this challenge. Of course, we cannot expect that the scientific research will solve the problem and will even meet these targets. We did a study in the Firelog project about these metrics, and we found many difficulties in their definition. First of all, in assessing what is the baseline, because we don't know yet where we are. Other thing that we can also discuss is if it is relevant to have a common objectives for the whole Europe for different scales. For example, the situation is, of course, different in different countries. These 0 fatalities, it's a good target. But in Portugal, in the last 5 years, we had already 33 people killed by fires, 15 last year. So it is not reachable. We should somehow modify. I think that the health impact issue that Krishna brought is also quite relevant. My question to Krishna and about the methodology that Silvanus presented, I think that scientific community can help in measuring the process. Maybe the solutions that we are providing can give some help in reducing the risk in some aspects. But let's say I wonder, and this is my question to Krishna, if the questionnaire that he presented, if those questions, how can they help to achieve these goals, and how can we, for example, the question that you put about the number of meteorological stations in the landscape. Of course, it depends very much on the sort of country where we are, and how can this contribute to the problem? These are some questions I have. Okay.
Absolutely. Thanks, Professor Viegas. I think one of the experience we had, especially from the Greek pilot case study, so I will let George add on to my response. Firefighters were telling us, look, you are telling us that the wind direction is going to change, or the prediction of the wind direction and the change in the fire behavior or the fire spread is in one particular way, but we don't have that data in a granular scale to analyze the wind direction. So again, this is very particular to one of the case studies we had, where there was one mountain with one fire station in one part of the mountain. The other part was on the other side. So whatever measurement, whatever experience that people were seeing from one side, it was not replicated. And even in our pilot in Gargano, which is a very mountainous region, we were not able to forecast the change in the weather pattern. And this is why I also use the word micro conditions, microclimatic conditions, which are also having an impact in which the fire spread could potentially, let's say, have an impact on. So I'm not saying that this would definitely help us to solve the problem, but with more data, the scientific investment in developing algorithms and the quality of the predictions that we are able to forecast will expect to increase. And I believe that investment would definitely help us towards enhancing the scientific development, where the algorithms and the performance of the algorithms and the granular scale of the algorithms can also be matched and enhanced. I don't know, George, do you want to have, do you have anything specific to add from the Greece?
No, just to add, because this is it is a typical problem. Elias also can add if something was. Please, when we have a big fire, you do have the weather forecast, okay? And the weather forecast says, for example, that we will have prevalent strong north winds of this velocity or something like that, okay? And what do you hear from the firefighters is that, guys, we don't have simply strong north winds, but we have south, the pattern changes all the time. So why we need, because the big fires, have their own weather, let's say somehow they create also their own conditions. Exactly. So we have to pass from the scale of having stations for example, every 40 or 50 or 60 kilometers. It's good, at least in some areas, to have weather station in much smaller distances. We have to change the scale of observation. If you have weather stations, let's say on every 5 kilometers or smaller distances, but that take into account the topography and in general the local conditions, then you can have much better observations and have much better early detection, much better forecasting, extremely better in terms of fire spread models. And you can have, and if you combine this with let's say a platform, usually we say modern systems, and you can pass this information to the firefighters and the disaster and the management, let's say authorities, the management experts there, you're starting to have a real-time situation awareness condition. And okay, the big weather forecast is this, but in my area I have this and this, and probably it will go towards there instead of there. That is the big, let's say, forecast. Okay, so you are working towards, if you want, this preparedness and suppression, and of course you can use the data for the future to go from weather conditions to climatic conditions, or at least to seasonal conditions. See, is this happening, on a regular basis now, on a seasonal scale, or is it happening on a very local time scale? There are a lot of things. From the moment you have the data, it's better. It could be difficult to analyze it, but you need to have the data. If you don't have the data, you don't speak. You're blind.
That's the experience we have had. The more data that can be fed in, the quality of the results can definitely improve. And that's, again, we don't know the answers. We are not providing solutions. We are only asking the questions. If there is a case from the scientific community to be made, and because of the technology that has been developed, now we have better understanding of what the models look like. If providing more information can enhance the quality. So again, I'm sure there will be much more newer studies that will be coming in the next few years, which will, again, I'm sure there will be more engagement in the way that we engage with the weather, climate, and microclimate conditions.
Yeah, and then sometimes we should not forget that, okay, we're now outside of the fire. Okay, we're discussing about the fire, but what you are doing where you are in front of the fire, do you know what to do? In many cases, they don't have the necessary information. Many firefighters have died, due to wrong decision on how to escape, because they have not seen the topography. They have moved in their own, with the wrong way. And maybe, okay, we have to also take to their conditions that they're in a stressful condition and they may not think right. Imagine that if these people that have died, if they have some more information, some on how to do, how the fire could move or something like that, they may have taken a different decision at that point. This is why you need data. Of course, you need good quality data because as many, let's say, in this IT topic, let's say, computer guys say garbage in, garbage out. But, you have to take care of what is your input in order to have a good output or at least a reliable output.
Okay, thank you. Elias or Tiago Domingos, any comment? Anyone of you? Any additional comments? Alex, do you see the application of your theory, of your study?
Yes, I was very happy to see. I wish I could have been there. I want to, see the cows in the fields. And that's the downside of being a researcher these days and not a implementer anymore. But I also wanted to, at the same time, if I may, discuss the questions from Carlos in the question and answer, because I think they're spot on. And I especially kind of bringing my own perspective in this, coming from the United States. I think it has been very interesting coming to Europe and seeing where things are with fire science and fire management, and living with fire. As you may or may not know, the United States really had to have kind of a reprogramming of how we lived with this. Basically, since colonization, this idea of fire repression kind of came over with the colonial setup of the forest system, which was set up under a European design from the French. And that made it so that, similar to Europe, it was fire suppression policy, fire suppression all the way. Until, as you know from seeing the news now, you can't win the war that way with fire. In fact, you have to stop making it a war and find a way to kind of live in harmony with fire, because you can have prescribed burn and you can choose when it happens, or you cannot choose when it happens. And a lot of people will, probably be lost. A lot of infrastructure will be lost. And so I think it's really interesting to see. I see that it seems like even since I started with this project, I see people talking differently in Europe about wildfire, more of this integrated fire management and less only about the suppression. And that really pleases me to see that. And to answer your question, Carlos, I can completely imagine that in rural areas, people are very aware of fire, and a lot of people probably still do prescribe fire in their own lands, even if it's not legal, as it is in some places. But I think that's the thing. It's still not legal in a lot of places, maybe even for people who are specially trained to do prescribed fire. So I think that speaks to the fact that even though there's knowledge in amongst many Europeans that we need to do integrated fire management, I think that's just making its way to the policy realm now. And I think for me, that's what I see the usefulness of these kinds of projects, is that by doing my little study and making my little maps, the idea is that policymakers can see this and see this clear kind of scientific case, which is what politicians, like to see, is something very kind of like, here are the facts. And then that can help to make more of a holistic change in the way Europe addresses fire, in the way that the United States is having to do now, working with Native Americans, working with landowners, working with a lot of different types of people and a lot of different types of fire management. So.
Yeah, just to follow up, I think, Carlos, your point is correct. And we have not discussed, or we have not had enough time to discuss about the restoration aspects. So we talked about prevention, the risk assessment, and more technology towards managing the fire incidents. But at least from the Silvanus point of view, we have invested significant, let's say, effort in analyzing the soil quality index. And after a post-fire incident, how do you regenerate the soil quality, soil erosion index? And we have developed also the ecological resilience index. And one of the very interesting case study from France is also to understand whether we can regenerate forest, the burnt area of the forest, with high fire resistant breeds of trees that will allow them to become more resilient landscapes in the future. So again, there is many more areas of research that we need to consider. And most importantly, I think financial sector has to play a role as well. Unfortunately, Silvanus, we never had any direct, let's say, collaboration with the insurance sector or with the financial instruments. But I'm sure they will have a much bigger role, which I believe other projects are taking into account. Sorry, Elias, please go ahead.
Yes, thank you, Krishna. I would like to answer the question of Christos Palikarakis about prescribed burning as a management tool. This has to do with all the social discussion that we have now. The best, let's say, users of prescribed burning in Greece is the shepherds. The shepherds use fire as a management tool to create new pasture lands. So if we want to implement prescribed burning in massive scale in Greece, we should use in the future the shepherds and the users of the fire, the traditional users. But the problem in the future is going to be, are we going to find traditional users in the rural areas in order to cooperate with them to implement prescribed burning as they know it? This is a serious question. For example, in the Dadia forest, where it was burned 2 years before, we are trying to create new openings in order to break the continuity of forest fuels. So we needed shepherds, we needed loggers, and we realized that the social change in the area has drive us to lose all these people, the traditional uses, and we were not capable to do a project of openings in the forest. This is a serious challenge to see how we are going to combine our scientific efforts, our conclusions from the uses of different methods of fire prevention, and how we are going to combine with the real situation, with the real society changes out there. This is a serious challenge.
I add here that I will take initiative of one of the questions from Carlos. Thank you for that. You're really throwing fuel to our conversation. One of the comments is that, okay, maybe in Portugal, it's something discussed, maybe applied more or less done. But let me remind you that Greece, Cyprus, and if we go even souther in the Mediterranean, Eastern Mediterranean area, prescribed burning is something that in the sound of the forest departments or firefighters is a no-no. They don't discuss it. It's not part of the strategies to follow, okay? It's something that now we are trying as researchers to introduce it to them or to demonstrate them through the actions happening in Portugal or in Spain, as well, that yes, it can be used, as we are presenting here now, as a land management tool, very effective. But you need to have knowledge, you need to have the experience to do it, okay? That's why we are still investigating it. It is under investigation and to demonstrate the effectiveness in several European projects to reinforce the use of it in the southern European countries, which wildfires, they're actually turning into extreme wildfires at the moment.
Clelia, if you allow me, I would like also to add to this answer to the questions the comments that Carlos Trinidad made. As you well said, it's a different situation. Carlos is Portuguese, and I know him personally, and I know that he's very much inside this process. And I would like to tell him first that in this webinar, we did not aim to present all the activities that we did in the projects. For example, in fire risk, we also dealt with these socioeconomic and communities involvement. I fully agree with what he says. Here we address just one point, that was of full management. And as Clelia said, the situation is different in different countries. In Portugal, we are, let's say, theoretically more advanced and in practice, for example, regarding prescribed fire. But as I said, it is not yet so much implemented as it should be. That was also my question to Tiago, if he's aware of the scale up of the study that he did, for example, for the mountain of Serra da Estrela that he showed, or for other regions in Portugal, why is it not so much applied? And a lateral question about the problem of the invasive species, because after the fire, sometimes we have invasive species. So I'd like to leave a message to Carlos Trindade for him to be, let's say, not so negative, because we are addressing those problems. We know that the solution of the problem is not with technology; it is with many things. First of all, with evolving the scientists with knowledge, and for knowledge we need data, as was pointed out. But we have to reach the people. We have to go to the citizens and to the communities and to involve them in the problem. We fully agree. Thank you.
George.
Yeah, just okay, because all the other, let's say, panelists more or less have said, and I've seen that in the answering section, you know, there's some movement there, some traffic. Just to know, this is why, let's say, we have to learn to live with the fire. Okay, we have to use the fire for good purposes, not only bad. Fire is a natural process since many years ago. So we have not, let's say, it's not something that happens first. And this is also why we are proposing also this implementation of the closer to nature forest management, because this is something that the EU, the Commission has done already and has provided a certain framework. And of course, we have to take also into account the local conditions. And when I'm saying the local conditions, I mean the local society, the local needs, the local economies, you know, not only the weather condition or soil condition or geological condition or vegetation, but we have to put this in the local framework always, you know, of any of the communities and be there. Just not to waste more time. Thank you.
Thank you. And Tiago Domingos?
Yeah, thanks. Yes, also on Carlos, comment by Carlos and other things that have been said, as I also fully agree with the importance of social and economic issues. And just to emphasize, underline that in the end, different people collected strands which are very close to the integrated strategy we are using, which is not forgetting the other components, but which is centrally the grazing and then its combination with prescribed burning. So even like with the issue of invasive species, the combination of prescribed fire and grazing is a good solution. As has been mentioned, the best people, if correctly in an adequate framework, the best people to do prescribed fire are the shepherds, but you can only have shepherds if you have animals anyway. And the issue, and so the grazing plays an absolutely central role, at least in Mediterranean areas. And it is grazing that has the possibility also to provide year-round employment. That's the other important thing. Even compared to other agricultural activities, animals need care 365 days a year. And so they are the promoters of continuous employment. Of course, what we now have, and now I'm just broadening a bit the discussion, what we now have is, for climate reasons, as people know, a spurious, excessively negative view of livestock production. And so that is creating an overall view in society that all livestock production is bad. And obviously, here we have an obvious case where livestock raising it can be good if adequately managed. And so I'd like to point that out. And I'd also like to point out that it has been a part of our strategy, and I showed it, that we're bringing in all the technology, the GPS collars, the monitoring with drones and remote sensing, because it is technically relevant and can help, absolutely, but also because changes the flavor of what it is to be a rural, someone acting in the rural world, and especially someone who's managing livestock. It takes us from low-skilled jobs, unattractive and socially unreputed, to something which is much more qualified and skilled, and which may also pay higher salaries. So there's a social component also to our option, to our working with technologies. But finally, and again, coming back to the comment by Carlos, there is an overall rural development issue that we cannot solve at the scale that we are using. This is a problem that has to be dealt with at least at the municipal scale and even broader regional scales, because it's about integrated rural development. Because of course I'm saying, well, animals are good to create employment, but if there are even people living in the villages, there's no one who's going to be a shepherd. And so this is really, we need a very strong call for adequate rural development strategies at the municipal and regional scale. And I must say that close to where we work, we are in the municipality of Covilhã, but next to us is the municipality of Fundão, which is an excellent example, if people want to look it up, exactly, of a municipality which is the only public agent which can have an overall view of multiple components of rural development, and they're doing that. And that's the issue. It's the scale for this. There has to be a political scale for this, and it has to be the scale of the local authorities which are managing regional development. And that's it. Thanks.
Thank you. Okay, it's 3 o'clock here, it's 2 o'clock somewhere else and 1 o'clock somewhere else. So yeah, we have all the time scales. And this should have been the end, but I want like another 5 minutes maximum. There is one question for Greece, actually, for Elias. Elias, yeah. How complete were the prescribed burning on hills? How much of the ground cover was removed? Any quick question, any quick answer on that is from Sandy Harrison, or if you want to type it.
Well, it was small plots, about 5 hectares, 5 to 4 hectares, to 5 hectares, 5 to 4 to 5 hectares, because we needed not the quantity but the quality of the plots. We needed to test different vegetation, different areas, different slopes. So the goal was not the quantity of the burnt area, but the quality, in order to measure all the parameters about the prescribed burning in different ecosystems, and to produce scientific results for the policymakers in order to introduce prescribed burning in the legislation. I answered another question, if the prescribed burning is causing problems to the roots, to microfauna on the soil. We saw no negative results because we measured all these parameters. This was the goal, not to implement prescribed burning, but to measure the results in erosion, in soil, in order in biodiversity. We saw an arrangement of biodiversity after the burning. So we wanted to produce scientific results in order to convince policymakers and the society that this is not something bad, this is good for the ecosystem. And if you do it wisely and with plan, it's going to have biodiversity benefits too.
Thank you, Elias. We have 2 more questions on the Q&A. Please, if it's addressed to any of you want to reply also writing a bit more detail, go ahead as I talk. Okay, so Gabrielle is saying the use of TLS in correlation with UAV will make fuel estimates in the forest more accurate and consequently the prescribed fire steps more effective and safe, even in environments strongly characterized by the presence of shrubs and stains, with a question mark at the end of the reading. Any comment on this by
I think the comment the question was addressed to me. So we don't have experience with TLS, but it does seem to be a good idea. So that would be my first answer. Just a caveat is in terms of the costs. So we are much more focusing on remote sensing, drones, and especially with satellite, just because of the cost. But otherwise, it could be an interesting idea. Yes.
Thank you. And final question by Mia Griffin is, okay, a common fault I have found is the geographical inconsistencies across remote sensing databases. Given the financial cost of resources for monitoring local fire regimes, what solutions can we provide for countries who lack the infrastructure of data collection, but also where models developed from Mediterranean fire regimes may not be applicable due to these geographical inconsistencies? Who wants to go?
I can try. Well, maybe I can try first and you can follow up. I think I actually think the remote sensing data that's available for free now, covering a lot of the world, like MODIS data and things like that. You say fire regimes, and perhaps you mean something a little bit different. But if you're just interested in following fire occurrence or where there has been fire and whatever the last 5 to 10 years, actually for a lot of the world, I think it's gotten a lot better, even for very remote parts of West Africa or wherever, and certainly for Europe. And I think it's also, I talked about these vegetation models, and fortunately, those are actually run for global. It's for the Earth system is what it models, and so we're getting more information now, I think, about how the entire fireworks on the whole Earth system. So to me, I think this is actually improving. I think there's more data available out there. So even if a country can't pay for the data themselves, more and more of it is freely available online.
I fully agree with Alex. But as you are working in Europe, most countries have infrastructure. But you are right, not all data is available because, for example, if we speak about the causes of fires, there are some countries that don't have yet the system to assess or to evaluate the causes. And it has been a recommendation from the research to have, let's say, this system of cause investigation applied uniformly throughout Europe. Of course, other data, as Alex said, can be retrieved from remote sensing about fire occurrence, fire size, and fire regimes. But some other information should come from organized structures that sometimes don't exist and should be implemented.
Great. Any other comment from our speakers? Thank you so much for your collaboration. Our colleagues from Silvanus, Krishna, George, Nikolaos for contribution. Elias, thank you for being here and your input. Tiago Domingos as well. My colleagues from Fire Jurisk, always pleasure and appreciation. Professor Viegas for the opportunity. Alex, amazing, once more. And Luis Mario for all the organization. Please follow the spaces, our and Silvanus and Fire Jurisk. There are much more webinars coming up with a lot of presentation and also some clustering events happening soon from Firelog. Have a nice weekend. Have a nice Friday afternoon. Enjoy whatever you're doing this day. And see you all soon. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Kalia.
Thank
Bye.
you.
Thank you.
Thanks, bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you. Bye bye.
Bye-bye. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, everyone. Bye.